In the fluorescent-lit corridors of TechFlow Industries, a single father's worst nightmare was about to come true. Evan Morales had spent months perfecting the delicate balance between his demanding night shifts and raising his 6-year-old daughter Mia alone. His new boss, Vanessa Harper, was known throughout the plant for her ice-cold efficiency and zero tolerance for personal drama. She'd built her reputation on numbers, not sentiment, and everyone knew that crossing her meant career suicide. When Evan's childcare arrangement collapsed on the morning of his performance review, he thought he could sneak Mia into the lobby for just 20 minutes. But children have their own plans, and Mia had been curious about the sad lady in the glass office for weeks. What happened next would shatter the carefully constructed walls both adults had built around their hearts and change 3 lives forever. Would this moment of vulnerability cost Evan everything he'd worked for, or would it reveal that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest wisdom? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Evan Morales had set it to ring. He'd been awake for the past 20 minutes anyway, staring at the ceiling and mentally rehearsing the day ahead. Today was different. Today was his performance review with Vanessa Harper, the woman who held his family's future in her perfectly manicured hands. He slipped out of bed with practiced silence, padding across the worn hardwood floors of their small 2-bedroom apartment. The morning routine had become a sacred ritual over the past 18 months, since Maria's death. Coffee first, then shower, then wake Mia with enough time for breakfast and getting her ready for Mrs. Chen's daycare down the hall. Every step choreographed to maintain the delicate balance that kept their world spinning. The kitchen still held traces of Maria's presence. Her recipe box sat on the counter, its corners worn smooth from years of use, filled with handwritten cards in her careful script. Evan had tried making her pozole last weekend, following her notes exactly, but somehow it hadn't tasted quite right. Mia had eaten it anyway, pronouncing it almost as good as Mama's, which was both a comfort and a gentle reminder of everything he was still learning to do alone. He measured coffee grounds with the precision of a man who'd learned that small consistencies could hold larger things together. The machine gurgled to life, filling the quiet apartment with familiar sounds. Outside, the city was beginning to stir. Distant traffic, the rumble of garbage trucks, the occasional bark of a dog. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives, the kind of normalcy Evan worked 16-hour days to maintain for his daughter. TechFlow Industries had been his salvation and his challenge. The night shift paid better than his day job at the hardware store, and the promise of advancement dangled like a carrot just out of reach. He'd started 6 months ago in the packaging department, working alongside men and women who understood the weight of supporting families on wages that never quite stretched far enough. But he'd caught the attention of supervisors with his reliability, his willingness to learn, and his careful attention to detail. Then Vanessa Harper had arrived. She'd swept into the plant 3 months ago like a force of nature, all sharp suits and sharper expectations. The previous night shift supervisor had been a grandfather of 5 who knew everyone's kids' names and kept a coffee pot perpetually brewing in his office. V. Harper's office had floor-to-ceiling windows, a pristine desk, and a water cooler that dispensed exactly the right temperature. She knew production numbers down to the decimal point and could recite efficiency metrics from memory. The workforce had initially resented her corporate precision, but even the most skeptical had grudgingly admitted that she got results. Productivity was up 14%. Quality control issues had dropped to nearly 0. The plant was running like a Swiss watch, and upper management was pleased. What they couldn't understand was why she seemed so alone. Evan had noticed it first during his 2nd week under her supervision. She arrived before anyone else and left after everyone had gone home. She ate lunch at her desk, worked through breaks, and had never been seen in the employee break room. When other supervisors gathered for their weekly meeting, she sat slightly apart, contributing when asked, but never lingering for the casual conversations that followed. There was something in her eyes, a carefully controlled distance, that reminded Evan of the way Mia had looked right after Maria's funeral. Like someone who'd learned that caring too much could hurt too much, so the safer choice was not to care at all. But that was probably just projection. Evan had a tendency to see grief in places where it might not exist, a habit Maria used to gently tease him about. "Not everyone who's quiet is sad, Mia Moore," she'd said once, watching him worry about a withdrawn co-worker. "Sometimes people are just thinking." The coffee finished brewing, and Evan poured himself a cup, savoring the first sip. He had 45 minutes before he needed to wake Mia, 45 minutes to review the presentation he'd prepared for today's meeting. He'd spent weeks documenting his contributions, organizing his thoughts, preparing for questions about his goals and ambitions. The promotion to quality control lead would mean a 20% raise and regular day hours. It would mean being home when Mia got out of school, helping with homework, making dinner together, instead of leaving her with sitters and neighbors. It would mean stability, the kind of foundation Maria had always wanted for their family. The irony wasn't lost on him that Maria would have been the one pushing him to take this risk, encouraging him to believe he deserved the opportunity. She'd been the dreamer in their relationship, the one who saw possibilities where he saw obstacles. "You worry too much, Evan," she'd often said, usually while attempting some ambitious project that required optimism and faith in equal measure. "Sometimes you have to trust that things will work out." He missed her voice in the morning quiet, missed the way she'd hum while making breakfast, missed the gentle chaos she'd brought to their orderly world. But Mia needed him to be both dreamer and realist now, to provide both stability and hope. His phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen. "Doctor appointment moved to 9 a.m. Can't watch Mia this morning. Sorry for short notice." Evan stared at the message, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The performance review was scheduled for 7:30 a.m., deliberately early to accommodate the night shift schedule. He'd requested this specific time weeks ago, had rearranged his hardware store shift to make it work. Mrs. Chen had never cancelled with such short notice before. He scrolled through his contacts, looking for alternatives. His sister lived an hour away and worked early, shifts herself. The daycare center didn't open until 8 a.m. His few friends were either at work or dealing with their own childcare arrangements. 20 minutes later, he was gently shaking Mia awake, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. "Morning, Mija," he whispered, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. She'd inherited Maria's features, the expressive brown eyes, the stubborn curl that refused to stay in place, the way her whole face lit up when she smiled. "Is it Saturday?" she asked hopefully, the way she did every morning. "No, baby, it's Thursday, but it's a special Thursday." She sat up, instantly alert. "Special how?" "Well, Mrs. Chen can't watch you this morning, so you get to come to work with Daddy for a little while." Mia's face brightened. She'd been curious about his workplace for months, asking detailed questions about the machines, the people, the mysterious place where Daddy went when she was sleeping. He'd always deflected, partly because TechFlow had strict policies about visitors, partly because he'd learned to keep his two worlds carefully separated. "Can I see your office?" "I don't have an office, remember. I work on the floor with the big machines, but you can sit in the lobby and read while I have my meeting." The important meeting? He'd mentioned it once, probably said too much about how nervous he was. Mia had an uncanny ability to sense his moods, to pick up on tensions he thought he'd hidden. "Yes, the important meeting. So I need you to be extra good, okay? Sit quietly, don't talk to strangers, and I'll be back in 30 minutes. She nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity, even if she couldn't fully grasp the stakes. This was how they'd learned to navigate their world, through careful explanations and mutual trust, through the understanding that sometimes grown-up problems required little girl cooperation. An hour later, they were walking through the employee entrance of TechFlow Industries. The building was a study in modern efficiency, glass and steel, clean lines, everything designed to convey competence and success. Evan had always felt slightly out of place here, like he was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. But today, with Mia's small hand in his, he felt exposed in a different way. The security guard, Jimmy, knew him well enough to wave them through, but Evan caught the curious glance at his daughter. "Family emergency," Evan explained briefly, which was technically true. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with leather chairs arranged around glass tables. A few employees moved through purposefully, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. Evan settled Mia in a chair near the reception desk, pulling out her backpack with its carefully packed selection of books and quiet activities. "Remember what we talked about," he said, kneeling to her level. 30 minutes, then we'll go get breakfast. At the place with the good pancakes. If the meeting goes well, we can celebrate with pancakes." She smiled, that brilliant smile that reminded him why he worked so hard, why every sacrifice felt worth making. "It will go well, Daddy. You're really good at your job." The absolute confidence in her voice nearly undid him. How did she know? How did children always seem to believe in their parents' abilities, even when the parents themselves were drowning in doubt? "I love you, Mija. Love you too. Now go show them how smart you are." He kissed her forehead and headed toward the elevator, checking his watch. 7:25. He had 5 minutes to compose himself, to transform from worried father to confident employee. The elevator doors closed, and he caught his reflection in the polished steel. He looked tired, older than his 34 years. But he also looked determined, and that would have to be enough. Above him, on the 3rd floor, Vanessa Harper was reviewing his file one final time. She'd been impressed by his work ethic, his attention to detail, his ability to solve problems without creating drama. He was exactly the kind of employee she valued: reliable, skilled, and refreshingly free of the ego issues that plagued so many of her subordinates. What she didn't know was that downstairs, his 6-year-old daughter was already planning her own version of the morning's events. Mia had been watching the grown-ups in the lobby, noting their purposeful movements and serious expressions. She'd been particularly fascinated by the woman in the glass office on the 3rd floor, the one who looked important and sad at the same time. And Mia had something she'd been saving for just the right moment: a drawing she'd made of herself wearing a security badge, just like the grown-ups. She'd worked very hard on it, using her best crayons and taking special care with the details. It was her contribution to Daddy's important day, her way of showing that she belonged in his world too. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 3rd floor, carrying Evan toward his future. In the lobby below, Mia was already slipping out of her chair, her small hand clutching the drawing she was certain would help her daddy succeed. The elevator's mechanical hum seemed louder than usual as Evan ascended to the 3rd floor, his presentation folder gripped tightly in his hand. Through the glass walls of Vanessa Harper's office, he could see her bent-over paperwork, her blonde hair pulled back in its signature severe bun. A framed photograph sat face down on her desk. He'd noticed it during previous meetings, but had never been close enough to see what it contained. She looked up as he approached, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Mr. Morales, right on time." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for fitting this review into your schedule." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your numbers have been impressive." As they settled into the familiar rhythm of performance metrics and productivity discussions, 3 floors below them, Mia was growing restless in the marble lobby. She'd finished her coloring book and was now studying the people who moved through the space with such purpose. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, exactly what they were supposed to be doing. She thought about what Daddy had said about his important meeting, about how much it meant for their future. The lady in the glass office must be very important if she was the one deciding whether Daddy got his promotion. Maybe she just needed to understand how good Daddy was at his job, how hard he worked, how much he cared about taking care of his family. The security guard, Jimmy, was busy helping someone sign in at the front desk. The receptionist had stepped away from her station. For just a moment, the path to the elevators was clear. Mia clutched her drawing tighter and made a decision that felt completely reasonable to her 6-year-old logic. If the important lady didn't know how wonderful her daddy was, maybe she just needed someone to tell her. The elevator button was higher than she could reach, but Mia was resourceful. She dragged a decorative plant stand over, climbed up, and pressed the button marked 3, because that's where she'd seen the lady in the glass office during her careful observations. Meanwhile, in that same glass office, Evan was in the middle of explaining his process improvements when V's assistant knocked on the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a little girl wandering the floor. Security is trying to figure out where she belongs." Evan's blood turned to ice. He was already rising from his chair when they heard the soft knock on the office door. Through the glass wall, they could see a small figure with dark curls, holding what appeared to be a piece of paper. "Oh God," Evan breathed. "That's my daughter." V's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "Your daughter?" "Childcare fell through this morning. I brought her to wait in the lobby. I never thought she'd—" He was moving toward the door, mortification and panic warring in his chest. This was exactly the kind of personal drama that could derail everything he'd worked for. But Mia was already pushing open the office door, her small face bright with determined enthusiasm. "Excuse me," she said politely, the way Daddy had taught her to address grown-ups. "Are you the lady who decides if my daddy gets his promotion?" V stared down at the child, struck speechless. Up close, the little girl had the most expressive brown eyes she'd ever seen, and she was holding out a drawing with the solemnity of someone presenting a state document. "Mia," Evan said, his voice tight with embarrassment, "you're supposed to be downstairs. I'm so sorry, Miss Harper. She's never—" "I made this for you," Mia continued, ignoring her father's distress and focusing entirely on V. "It's me wearing a security badge like the grown-ups. Daddy says you have to earn your place here, so I thought maybe if I had a badge too, I could belong in Daddy's work world." The drawing was unmistakably the work of a 6-year-old, stick figures and bright crayon colors, but executed with careful attention to detail. The little girl in the picture wore an oversized badge and a huge smile, standing next to what was clearly meant to be the TechFlow building. V found herself taking the drawing, her usual sharp responses nowhere to be found. There was something about the child's earnest presentation that had caught her completely off guard. "Mia, we need to go," Evan said, reaching for his daughter's hand. "Miss Harper is very busy." "Wait," V heard herself saying. She was still staring at the drawing, at the pure joy captured in those crayon strokes. "It's very nice, Mia, thank you." "Daddy works really hard," Mia said, settling into a cross-legged position on the floor, as if she planned to stay. "He gets up super early and comes home super late, and sometimes he falls asleep reading me stories because he's so tired. But he always reads them anyway because he says stories are important." Evan felt his face burning. "Mia, please." "And he tries to make Mama's recipes, but they don't taste exactly right yet. But he keeps trying because he says keeping traditions alive is how we honor people we love." Something shifted in V's expression. The professional mask slipped just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "Your mama. She died when I was 4, Mia said matter-of-factly, the way children state difficult truths without fully understanding their weight. "But Daddy says she's still with us in all the ways that matter, in the recipes and the songs and the way we take care of each other." The office had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the plant floor below. Evan stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed professional image crumble in real time. But something unexpected was happening to V. The child's words had found their way past defenses she'd built over years of deliberate isolation. She found herself thinking of the photograph on her desk, the one she kept face down because some images were too painful to look at every day. "Do you still miss your little boy?" The question came out of nowhere, spoken with the directness that only children possessed. Mia was looking up at V with those impossibly expressive eyes, her head tilted slightly to one side. "Mia!" Evan gasped, but V held up a hand to stop him. "How did you—" V's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Daddy says it helps to talk about people we miss," Mia continued gently. "He says keeping them secret makes the missing hurt worse. Do you want to see his picture?" She was pointing at the face-down photograph, somehow having intuited what it contained. V's hands were shaking as she slowly turned the frame around, revealing a picture of herself with a little boy who couldn't have been much older than Mia. They were at a baseball game, both wearing oversized gloves and matching grins. "He looks nice," Mia said simply. "What was his name?" "Connor," V managed, the words scraping against her throat. "His name was Connor." "That's a good name. I bet he would have liked my daddy. Daddy's really good with kids because he understands that sometimes we need to feel important too." The tears came without warning, 10 years of carefully controlled grief suddenly pouring down V's face. She hadn't cried since the funeral, had convinced herself that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in a world that demanded strength and competence. But here was this little girl, offering wisdom with the unconscious grace of innocence, and suddenly all of V's protective walls felt as fragile as tissue paper. "I'm sorry," she gasped, frantically reaching for tissues. "This is completely inappropriate." "It's okay to cry," Mia said, climbing into the chair next to V's desk. "Daddy cried a lot when Mama died. He thought I didn't see, but I did. And then one day I told him it was okay to cry in front of me because that's what families do. They help each other with the sad parts." Through the glass walls of the office, other employees had begun to notice the unusual scene. Vanessa Harper, the iron-willed supervisor who ran the night shift with mechanical precision, was crying in front of a 6-year-old while the child's father stood by in obvious distress. But none of that mattered in this moment. All that mattered was the simple human connection happening in this sterile corporate space, the recognition that grief shared was somehow more bearable than grief carried alone. "Your daddy is very lucky to have you," V said finally, her voice still unsteady. "I know," Mia said with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her worth. "And maybe Connor is still with you too, in all the ways that matter. Daddy says love doesn't end just because someone goes away." V looked at Evan then, really looked at him, seeing not just the dedicated employee she'd been evaluating, but the man who had raised this remarkable little girl, who had somehow taught her that kindness was more important than rules, that reaching out to someone in pain was worth the risk of breaking protocol. The performance review would have to wait. Some conversations were more important than productivity metrics. The silence that followed Mia's innocent wisdom stretched across the office like a bridge between two isolated islands. V dabbed at her eyes with tissues, acutely aware that her carefully maintained professional facade had crumbled in front of not just an employee, but his 6-year-old daughter. Through the glass walls, she could see heads turning, conversations pausing, as the entire floor tried to process the unprecedented sight of their unflappable supervisor in tears. Evan clutched his worn employee handbook in his free hand, its pages marked with highlighter and sticky notes from months of careful study. He'd memorized every policy, every procedure, every guideline for advancement. Nowhere in those pages did it mention what to do when your daughter breaks into your boss's office and asks about her dead child. "I should take her home," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'm sorry, Miss Harper. I know this isn't—" "No," V interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. She looked down at Mia, who was still sitting cross-legged in the chair, swinging her feet and humming softly to herself as if emotional breakdowns in corporate offices were perfectly normal. "I mean, if you need to go, of course, but this isn't. This doesn't have to affect your review." But they both knew it already had. The careful professional distance they'd maintained for months had been shattered by a child's directness, by questions that cut straight to the heart of things adults spent years learning to avoid. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said, addressing V with the same serious tone she used when asking her father about important matters. "Why do grown-ups have meetings in rooms with glass walls if they're supposed to be private?" Despite everything, V felt her mouth twitch upward. "That's actually a very good question. I suppose it's because transparency is supposed to be important in business. But you can't be transparent about feelings if everyone's watching," Mia observed with startling insight. "That's why Daddy and I talk about the hard stuff at home, where it's just us." Evan felt his chest tighten, His daughter had an uncanny ability to expose truths that adults worked hard to keep buried. It was one of the things he loved most about her, and right now, one of the things that terrified him most. "Mia, sweetheart, why don't we let Miss Harper get back to her work?" "Actually," V said, then paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Would you mind if we rescheduled this? I'm finding it difficult to concentrate on performance metrics right now." The request was so unlike anything Evan had expected that he could only nod. V was known for her rigid adherence to schedules, her ability to compartmentalize anything that might interfere with productivity. The fact that she was admitting to being distracted felt monumentally significant. "Of course, whatever works best for you. Tomorrow morning? Same time. I'll be here." V looked down at Mia's drawing again, her fingers tracing the crayon lines. "Mia, would it be okay if I kept this? It's been a long time since anyone gave me something they made themselves." Mia beamed. "You can keep it forever if you want. I can make you more pictures too. Do you like flowers? I'm really good at drawing flowers." "I would like that very much." As they prepared to leave, Mia stood up and walked over to V's desk, studying the now upright photograph of her and Connor. "He has a nice smile," she said simply, "like you do, when you're not trying to look serious." After they'd gone, V sat alone in her office, staring at the drawing Mia had left behind. The child had managed to accomplish in 10 minutes what months of team-building exercises and corporate retreats had failed to achieve. She'd made human connection feel possible again. The rest of the morning passed in a strange haze. Employees who normally gave V a wide berth found excuses to walk past her office, curiosity evident in their glances. She'd always prided herself on maintaining professional boundaries, on keeping her personal life completely separate from her work responsibilities. Now everyone had witnessed the moment those boundaries dissolved. During the lunch break, her assistant knocked tentatively on the door. "Miss Harper, there are some people asking if everything's okay. Should I tell them you're unavailable?" "What kind of people?" "Well, Maria Santos from packaging wanted to know if you needed anything, and Jim Rodriguez from quality control mentioned that his wife makes excellent empanadas, if you're ever interested." V stared at her assistant in bewilderment. In 3 months of working here, no one had ever offered her food, asked if she needed anything, or suggested any kind of social interaction beyond what was strictly necessary for work. "They saw what happened with the little girl," her assistant continued gently. "I think they realize you're more human than you let on." More human than she let on. The phrase stuck with her throughout the afternoon as she tried to focus on spreadsheets and production reports. Had she really been so successful at keeping people at arm's length that basic humanity came as a surprise? Meanwhile, Evan was having his own crisis of confidence at the hardware store, where he'd picked up a double shift to make up for the abbreviated morning. His co-worker Dave noticed his distraction immediately. "You look like someone who's been hit by a truck," Dave observed, handing him a cup of coffee. "Bad review?" "We didn't actually finish the review," Evan admitted. Mia she interrupted, asked some questions that were probably too personal. "What kind of questions?" Evan hesitated, then found himself explaining the morning's events. Dave listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. It felt good to talk about it, to process what had happened with someone who understood the challenges of single parenthood. "Sounds like your kid has good instincts," Dave said finally. "Maybe she saw something you missed." "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been working under this Harper woman for months, right? Always talking about how intimidating she is, how she never shows any emotion. But kids are good at seeing past the masks adults wear. Maybe she's not as cold as you thought." That evening, as Evan helped Mia with her homework, she brought up the morning's adventure without prompting. "I liked Miss V," she announced, carefully coloring inside the lines of a worksheet. "She's sad, but not the scary kind of sad. The lonely kind." "What's the difference?" "Scary sad makes people mean. Lonely sad just makes them quiet." She looked up at him with those perceptive brown eyes. "You were lonely sad too, before we started talking about Mama more." Evan set down his own work and really looked at his daughter. When had she become so wise? When had she learned to read emotions with such clarity? You think Miss Harper is lonely? I think she forgot how to let people be nice to her. Mia said matter-of-factly, like you did after Mama died. Remember when Mrs. Chen wanted to bring us dinner and you said no because you didn't want to be a bother? He remembered. He remembered a lot of offers of help that he'd declined, convinced that accepting assistance meant admitting failure. It had taken him months to understand that letting people care wasn't a sign of weakness. Do you think I should have said yes to more help? I think grown-ups make everything too complicated, Mia said, returning to her coloring. If someone's sad and you can make them feel better, you should try. That's what families do. But Ms. Harper isn't family, sweetheart. Mia looked at him with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. Family isn't just the people you're born with, Daddy. It's the people who choose to take care of each other. Later that night, after Mia was asleep, Evan found himself thinking about his daughter's words. He pulled out his employee handbook, the document he'd relied on to navigate the complex world of corporate advancement. Its pages were filled with policies and procedures, guidelines for everything from vacation requests to performance evaluations. But nowhere in those carefully crafted rules was there any guidance for what happened when professional boundaries gave way to human connection. Nowhere did it explain how to move forward when your 6-year-old daughter had inadvertently created the most honest moment you'd ever shared with your supervisor. He thought about V's tears, about the photograph of her son, about the way she'd looked at Mia with such raw vulnerability. Dave was right, maybe there was more to Vanessa Harper than the efficient supervisor he'd been so intimidated by. The question was, what to do with that knowledge, how to navigate the suddenly complicated territory between professional respect and personal understanding. Because Mia was right, some connections, once made, couldn't be unmade. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't something to be afraid of. The next morning brought a familiar routine with an unfamiliar undercurrent of anticipation. Evan went through the motions of coffee and shower, but his mind kept drifting to the rescheduled performance review. Mrs. Chen was back to her regular schedule, which meant Mia would be safely in daycare, but somehow that felt like a loss rather than a relief. "Are you going to see Ms. V today?" Mia asked over breakfast, carefully spreading strawberry jam on her toast in the precise pattern she preferred. "Yes, we have our meeting this morning. Will you tell her I said hi?" Evan paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I don't think that would be appropriate, sweetheart. Yesterday was special circumstances. Why do grown-ups think being nice isn't appropriate?" The question lingered in his mind as he walked into TechFlow an hour later. The lobby felt different somehow, charged with the memory of yesterday's events. Jimmy, the security guard, gave him a knowing nod. "How's the little artist today?" Word traveled fast in a place like this. Evan managed a smile. "She's good. Made 3 more drawings last night." "Smart kid. Sounds like she knows how to read people." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than usual. When he reached V's office, he found her standing at the window, looking out at the parking lot below. She'd traded her usual severe bun for a softer style, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. The change was subtle but significant, like seeing someone without armor for the first time. "Mr. Morales," she said, turning as he approached. "Thank you for coming back." "Of course. I hope you're that yesterday didn't." "Please, sit." She gestured to the same chair he'd occupied 24 hours earlier, but everything about the dynamic felt different. The photograph of her and Connor remained upright on her desk, and Mia's drawing had been carefully taped to the glass wall where both of them could see it. "Before we discuss your performance review," V said, settling into her chair, "I want to apologize for yesterday. My emotional response was completely unprofessional." "You don't need to apologize for being human." The words came out before Evan could stop them, more direct than he'd ever been with a supervisor. But V didn't seem offended. Instead, she looked almost relieved. "Is that what Mia would say?" "Probably. She has very strong opinions about people being allowed to have feelings. She's remarkable. The way she just..." V gestured vaguely, searching for words. I haven't talked about Connor in years, not to anyone, but she made it feel safe somehow. Evan found himself leaning forward slightly. How long has it been? 4 years in November, leukemia. The words came out steady, factual, but he could see the cost of saying them. He was 7. I'm sorry, I can't imagine. People always say that, but I think you actually can imagine. You've lost someone who was your whole world too. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared experience settling between them. Outside the glass walls, the plant was coming alive with the day shift, but inside this office, time seemed suspended. Mia drew this for you, Evan said finally, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. She wanted me to give it to you, but she was very specific that I shouldn't look at it first. She said it was private. V unfolded the drawing carefully. It showed 3 stick figures standing together, a tall man, a smaller woman, and a tiny girl between them. Above their heads, 2 more figures floated in what might have been clouds or sky, watching over the group below. One clearly had Mia's dark curls, the other had short hair like Connor's in the photograph. At the bottom, in Mia's careful 6-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Families in heaven and on earth." V's breath caught. She drew this last night? She worked on it for an hour before bed. Said she wanted to make sure she got the details right. Evan hesitated, then added, "She thinks you need more people in your Earth family." Out of the mouths of babes, V traced the figures with her finger, her expression soft. "I haven't thought about family in those terms in a long time. After Connor died, it felt easier to just disconnect, safer. I understand that. After Maria died, I turned down every invitation, every offer of help. I thought if I could just control everything myself, nothing else could go wrong." "What changed your mind?" "Mia, mostly. She needed more than just survival. She needed community, connections, the messy, complicated relationships that make life worth living." He paused, studying V's face. "She thinks you need the same thing." "She told you that?" "Not in so many words, but last night she said something about how grown-ups make everything too complicated, how family is really just people who choose to take care of each other." V was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the drawing and the photograph of Connor. "I built my entire career on the idea that emotional distance was a strength, that caring too much made you vulnerable, ineffective. Maybe it does, sometimes, but maybe being completely disconnected makes you something else entirely." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Evan felt something shift in the space between them. Not just the professional relationship they'd maintained for months, but something more fundamental. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that they were both people who'd learned to carry loss differently, but were still carrying it nonetheless. "Your performance review," she said suddenly, as if remembering why they were there. "We should probably discuss that." "Right, of course." But even as they turned to the formal business of metrics and goals, the emotional undercurrent remained. V found herself noticing things she'd overlooked before the careful way Evan explained. His process improvements, the pride he took in quality work, the thoughtfulness behind his suggestions for team efficiency. "You've exceeded every target we set 6 months ago," she said, reviewing his file. "Your error rate is essentially 0. Your productivity is in the top 10%, and 3 different supervisors have mentioned your reliability. Thank you. This Jobit means everything to me, to us. The quality control lead position opens next month. Day shift, 20% salary increase, supervisory responsibilities." She paused, her pen hovering over his evaluation form. "I was planning to recommend you." "Was planning?" "I am planning to recommend you. Nothing about yesterday changes your qualifications or your work performance." Relief flooded through him, but it was accompanied by something else, a disappointment. The realization that despite the personal connection they'd shared, this was still fundamentally a professional relationship, bounded by corporate structures and appropriate distances. "However," V continued, "I find myself hoping that recommendation doesn't mean we stop having conversations that matter." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and uncertainty. Evan felt his carefully maintained professional composure wavering. "Mia would be disappointed if we went back to just being polite to each other," he said carefully. "Just Mia?" "No, not just Mia." They finished the review in an atmosphere of new understanding, but as Evan prepared to leave, V called him back. Would it be appropriate to ask how Mia is doing? In school, I mean, with friends." "She's doing well. She's bright, social, asks a million questions about everything." He hesitated, then added, "She'd love to show you her classroom sometime. She's very proud of her reading progress." "I'd like that, if it wouldn't be too complicated. I think we're past worrying about complications." After he left, V sat alone with Mia's drawing and her own churning thoughts. For 4 years, she'd built her life around the principle that caring led to loss, that emotional investment was a luxury she couldn't afford. But this little girl had waltzed into her office and suggested that maybe the real luxury was connection itself, messy, vulnerable, and worth the risk. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Evan's contact information, then hesitated. What would she say? How did you navigate the space between professional courtesy and personal interest when a 6-year-old had redefined all the boundaries? Finally, she typed, "Please thank Mia for the drawing. It's beautiful." His response came quickly, "She'll be thrilled. She's already planning your next one. I'm looking forward to it." Such simple words, but they felt like a promise, an acknowledgement that whatever was happening between them was bigger than performance reviews and corporate hierarchies. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed the slow, careful building of trust between two people who'd forgotten how to let others matter. 2 weeks after the performance review, V found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, leaving work at a reasonable hour. She told herself it was because efficiency improvements had streamlined operations, but the truth was more complicated. For the first time since Connor's death, she had somewhere she wanted to be. The somewhere was Mia's school, where she'd been invited to career day. It had started with casual conversation during one of her increasingly frequent check-ins with Evan about work projects that could have been handled via email. Mia had mentioned the upcoming event, wondering what it would be like to have someone who worked in an office with glass walls come talk to her class. "I bet Miss V knows lots of interesting things about business," Mia had said during one of their impromptu visits to the plant lobby. These visits had become semi-regular occurrences whenever Evan's childcare arrangements hit snags, and somehow V found herself looking forward to them with an intensity that should have concerned her. "I don't know if Miss Harper would be interested in talking to a bunch of first graders," Evan had replied carefully. "Why don't we ask her?" And somehow, before V knew quite how it had happened, she was standing in front of 26 curious 6-year-olds, explaining what a production supervisor did and fielding questions that ranged from practical, "Do you get to wear a hard hat?" to philosophical, "Why do grown-ups have to work so much?" Mia sat in the front row, beaming with pride as if she'd personally arranged for the most fascinating speaker in the world to visit their classroom. She'd introduced V to her teacher as "my daddy's friend from work who knows about feelings and business." "Tell them about the glass office," Mia urged when V mentioned working in manufacturing. "Well," V said, looking at the sea of expectant faces, "my office has walls made of glass, which means everyone can see what I'm doing. Sometimes that feels scary, like being in a fishbowl, but it also means I can see everyone else and they can see me, which makes it easier to remember that we're all working together." A boy in the back row raised his hand. "Do you have a boss?" "I do. Several, actually. Even grown-ups have people they report to." "Do you ever get in trouble?" V found herself smiling, really smiling, not the professional expression she wore in meetings. "Sometimes. Just like you, I'm still learning how to do things better." After the presentation, Mia's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled V aside. "I have to say, Mia talks about you quite a bit. She says you're teaching her daddy how to not be worried all the time." "I think it's the other way around," V replied. "Mia and her father are teaching me things I'd forgotten." That evening, In her apartment that felt too large and too quiet after the energy of the classroom, V found herself in Connor's old room. She'd left it largely untouched for 4 years, unable to pack away his things, but unable to look at them either. Tonight, she opened his closet and pulled out his baseball glove, the leather worn soft from countless games of catch in the backyard. She'd taught him to play, spending hours in the yard, teaching him how to position his glove, how to keep his eye on the ball, how to throw with accuracy rather than just strength. Those had been some of their best times together, just the two of them, focused on something simple and pure and entirely theirs. The glove still smelled faintly of leather oil and grass stains. She slipped it onto her hand, remembering the weight of it, the promise it had represented. Connor had planned to try out for Little League the spring after he died. They'd been practicing together every weekend, his determination to make the team matching her determination to help him succeed. For the first time in 4 years, holding the glove didn't bring only pain. There was sadness, yes, but also something else: gratitude for the time they'd had. Recognition that love didn't end just because the person was gone. Mia's simple wisdom, repeated through her father's gentle reminders, was slowly reshaping how V thought about memory and loss. Meanwhile, across town, Evan was dealing with his own realizations. Mia had been full of stories about career day, about how Miss V had answered every question patiently, and how she'd smiled when talking about working with people. She liked being there, Mia announced over dinner. I could tell. How could you tell? Her voice got happier when kids asked questions. Like yours does when you help me with math homework, you get excited about explaining things. Evan paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. You think Miss Harper enjoyed talking to your class? I think she forgot she likes kids until she remembered. Like how you forgot you liked cooking until we started making Mama's recipes together. There it was again, that uncanny ability to see straight to the heart of things. Evan was beginning to understand that his 6-year-old daughter possessed an emotional intelligence that put most adults to shame. Do you think she's lonely? He asked, genuinely curious about Mia's perspective. Not as much as before. But yeah, still lonely. Her house probably feels too big with just her in it. How do you know that? Because our apartment felt too big after Mama died, even though it's tiny. Empty feels big no matter how much space you actually have. That night, after Mia was asleep, Evan found himself thinking about V's apartment. He'd never seen it, of course, but Mia's description resonated. He remembered the months after Maria's death, when their small space had felt cavernous, when silence echoed off the walls and made everything seem hollow. His phone buzzed with a text from V. Thank you for letting me crash career day. I haven't had that much fun in years. He stared at the message, struck by her choice of words. When was the last time he'd thought of work-related activities as fun? When was the last time anyone had described time with children that way, especially someone who'd lost a child of their own? He typed back, Mia was thrilled to have you there. She's already planning ways to get you back to school. I'd be open to that. She mentioned a science fair next month. Evan smiled, imagining V surrounded by cardboard volcanoes and solar system models, probably giving the same focused attention to 6-year-old explanations that she gave to production reports. Fair warning, she'll expect you to judge her project with complete scientific rigor. What's her hypothesis? That plants grow better when you read to them. She's been reading Charlotte's Web to lima beans for 3 weeks. Solid methodology. I'm impressed. Their text exchange continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from Mia's reading progress to the best way to explain photosynthesis to first graders. It was the kind of easy, meandering conversation Evan hadn't had since Maria died, natural, unforced, built on genuine interest rather than obligation. The next day at work, their interaction carried a new warmth. V found excuses to walk through Evan's section, ostensibly checking on production metrics, but really just enjoying the easy familiarity that had developed between them. Other employees noticed the changed-tooth way their supervisor lingered during conversations with Evan, the way her expression softened when his name came up in meetings. "Harper's got a thing for Morales," he overheard someone whisper during break. "Good for him," came the reply. "They both seem happier lately." Evan felt his face heat, but he couldn't deny the observation. He was happier. For the first time since Maria's death, he looked forward to more than just getting through each day. He looked forward to conversations with V, to watching Mia's obvious affection for her, to the slow building of something that felt like friendship, but carried the potential for much more. But with that happiness came worry. The corporate hierarchy was clear about relationships between supervisors and employees. Even if nothing inappropriate was happening, and it wasn't, he told himself firmly, the appearance of favoritism could be damaging to both their careers. These concerns came to a head the following week when V recommended him for additional training that would position him for the quality control promotion. The opportunity was everything he'd worked toward, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his relationship with V might be influencing her professional judgment. "I need to ask you something," he said during one of their increasingly common after-hours conversations in her office. "This training opportunity, is this about my work performance, or is it about us?" She finished quietly. "Is there an us?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been carefully not discussing. V set down her pen and looked at him directly. "Your performance metrics speak for themselves, Evan. You've earned this opportunity through your work, not through whatever this is between us." "But there is something between us." "Yes," the admission came quietly, honestly. "There is, and that complicates things. Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe we're making it more complicated than it needs to be." V laughed, but there was no humor in it, spoken like someone who's never had to navigate corporate politics while trying to maintain professional credibility. "You're right, I haven't. But I know what it's like to be afraid of letting people matter because it makes everything messy and unpredictable." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing risks and possibilities, professional obligations against personal desires. "Mia asked me something today," she said finally. "What did she ask?" "She wanted to know if I'd ever had a best friend as a grown-up. When I said no, she asked why not. I told her grown-ups don't have best friends the same way kids do, and she said that was sad because everyone needs someone who cares if they're happy." Evan felt his chest tighten. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she was probably right, and then she said maybe I could be friends with you and her if I wanted to learn how." "And do you want to learn how?" V reached for Connor's baseball glove, which had somehow migrated from her apartment to her office, sitting now on the bookshelf where she could see it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of caring and losing again. I'm scared of compromising my professional judgment. I'm scared of all the ways this could go wrong. Those are good reasons to be scared. But maybe being scared isn't a good enough reason to keep living like you're already dead." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but V didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Mia said something similar. She said hiding from sadness just makes you miss all the happiness too. She's a wise kid. She gets that from her father." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them aware that they were standing at a crossroads that would determine not just their professional relationship, but their personal futures as well. The handwritten note appeared on V's desk on a Tuesday morning, folded carefully in half with Ms. V written in purple crayon across the front. Inside, in Mia's precise first-grade handwriting, were 7 words that would stay with V for the rest of her life. "Thank you for being nice to my daddy." She found Evan during his lunch break, sitting in the employee cafeteria with a sandwich and a stack of technical manuals. The note was still in her hand. "Did you know about this?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked at the note and smiled. "She's been working on her writing. Said she had something important to tell you, but wanted to make sure she spelled everything right." "When did she write it?" "Last night, after I told her you'd recommended me for the advanced training program." His expression grew more serious. "She wanted to thank you for helping our family, but I think there's more to it than that." "What do you mean?" "She's been watching us, V. Kids see everything, even the things we think we're hiding. She knows there's something happening between us, and she approves. V traced the crayon letters with her finger. That makes one of us. You don't approve? I don't know what to approve of. We haven't exactly defined what this is. Evan leaned back in his chair, studying her face. 3 weeks of increasingly personal conversations had taught him to read her expressions, to see past the professional mask she wore for everyone else. What do you want it to be? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. V had spent 4 years convincing herself that wanting things led to disappointment, that the safer path was to expect nothing beyond basic professional courtesy and functional working relationships. I want, she started, then stopped. This is exactly the problem. I don't know how to want things anymore. I don't know how to trust that getting what I want won't just set me up for losing it all again. So you'd rather not want anything at all? It's worked for 4 years. Has it? Has it really worked? Or have you just gotten good at pretending it's enough? The cafeteria around them buzzed with the usual lunchtime conversations, complaints about overtime, discussions of weekend plans, the comfortable chatter of people who knew each other well enough to fill silence without effort. V had always felt separate from that easy camaraderie, convinced that maintaining professional distance was more important than building relationships. But now, sitting across from Evan, she realized how much she'd been missing. Not just the romantic possibility that hummed between them, but the simple pleasure of having someone who genuinely cared about her answer when they asked how her day was going. Mia invited me to dinner, she said suddenly. What? Yesterday, when you brought her by the office. She said you were making Maria's arroz con pollo this weekend, and I should come try it because you're getting really good at the recipe, but you still need practice with the sofrito. Evan laughed, despite the tension of the moment. She's not wrong. I can never get the garlic to cilantro ratio quite right. Is the invitation still open? V. I know it's complicated. I know there are policies and procedures and a dozen reasons why we should keep this professional. But I'm tired of eating dinner alone every night. I'm tired of pretending I don't look forward to your texts. I'm tired of acting like I don't care about you and Mia when you're the best part of my day. The admission hung between them, more honest than anything she'd said in years. Evan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Saturday at 6. Fair warning, Mia will probably interrogate you about your favorite foods and try to teach you card tricks. I'm looking forward to it. That afternoon, V found herself doing something she hadn't done since Connor died, grocery shopping for someone other than herself. She wandered the aisles of the market, selecting ingredients for a dessert to bring to dinner, trying to remember what 6-year-olds liked. She settled on ingredients for flan, a recipe her own mother had taught her decades ago. The process of cooking felt foreign after years of takeout and frozen meals. But as she heated sugar for the caramel, as she whisked eggs and vanilla into warm milk, muscle memory kicked in. This was what kitchens were for: creating something with your hands, putting love into food that would nourish people you cared about. Saturday evening arrived, with the particular weight of first times. V stood outside Evan and Mia's apartment building, holding her contribution to dinner and wondering if she'd forgotten how to be a guest in someone's home. The last time she'd shared a meal in someone else's kitchen, Connor had still been alive. Mia answered the door, wearing an apron that was clearly meant for an adult, the ties wrapped around her tiny waist twice. "Miss V, you came! Daddy, she really came!" "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss a rose con pollo made by the 2 best chefs I know." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of lived-in comfort that came from people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Photographs covered the refrigerator, Mia's school pictures, drawings, family snapshots that included a beautiful woman who could only be Maria. Instead of feeling like an intruder, V felt welcomed into something precious. "Mama's picture is right there," Mia said, following V's gaze. "Daddy says she would have liked you because you're smart and kind, and you make him smile differently now." "Mia," Evan warned gently from the kitchen, but he was smiling. "It's true, you do smile differently. Before you were friends with Miss V, your smiles looked tired. Now they look happy." Dinner was a revelation. The food was delicious. Evan had indeed mastered Maria's recipe, but more than that, the conversation flowed with the easy comfort of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Mia regaled them with stories from school, demonstrated her latest card trick, badly, and asked V detailed questions about everything from her favorite color to whether she'd ever ridden a horse. "Do you live in a big house?" Mia asked during dessert, which had been unanimously declared the best flan anyone had ever tasted. "Bigger than this, but not as nice." "Why not as nice?" V considered the question seriously. "Because a home isn't really about the size of the space. It's about the people in it and how they make you feel. That's what Daddy says too. He says Mama made everywhere feel like home just by being there." After dinner, while Evan cleaned dishes, V found herself on the living room floor with Mia, helping with a puzzle of the solar system. It had been so long since she'd sat cross-legged on carpet, so long since she'd felt the particular satisfaction of finding pieces that fit perfectly together. "Miss V," Mia said quietly, fitting Jupiter into place, "are you and Daddy going to fall in love?" The question was so direct, so matter-of-fact, that V nearly dropped the piece of Saturn she was holding. "That's a very personal question, sweetheart." "I know, but I think you should." "Why's that?" "Because love makes people better. It made Daddy better when he loved Mama, and it makes me better when he loves me, and I think it would make both of you better if you loved each other." From the kitchen came the sound of dishes being quietly washed, and V wondered if Evan could hear their conversation, if he was curious about her answer. "Love can also hurt people," she said gently. "Sometimes when you love someone and then lose them, it hurts so much you don't want to love anyone else. Like what happened to you with Connor." "Yes, like what happened to me with Connor." Mia nodded solemnly, then reached over and patted V's hand with the serious comfort of someone far older than her years. "But Daddy says the hurt means the love was real, and real love doesn't go away just because the person does. It stays with you and makes you able to love other people better. Your Daddy is very wise. He learned it from Mama, and from missing her, and from taking care of me." Mia fitted the last piece of the puzzle into place, completing the solar system. "Maybe you could learn it too." That night, as V drove home to her too large, too quiet apartment, she carried with her the echo of laughter, the warmth of acceptance, and the revolutionary idea that maybe it was possible to love again without betraying the love that had come before. The note from Mia was still in her purse, 7 words that had opened a door she'd thought was permanently closed. "Thank you for being nice to my Daddy." Such a simple sentiment, but it represented something much larger, the recognition that kindness created connection, that small gestures rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict or control. For the first time in 4 years, V fell asleep thinking not about what she'd lost, but about what she might be brave enough to find. The corporate layoff memo arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by courier to V's office with the kind of formal efficiency that signaled bad news. She recognized the letterhead "Immediately Regional Headquarters," the kind of communication that bypassed normal channels and demanded immediate attention. Her hands were steady as she opened the envelope, but her stomach dropped as she read the contents. Effective immediately, TechFlow Industries was implementing a 15% workforce reduction. As night shift supervisor, she was tasked with identifying and terminating 23 employees by the end of the week. The criteria were clear: last hired, first fired, with performance metrics serving as the tiebreaker for employees with similar tenure. Evan's name was third on the automatically generated list. V stared at the document, reading it twice to make sure she wasn't mistaken. 6 months of employment put him squarely in the vulnerability zone, despite his exemplary performance reviews and the obvious respect he'd earned from his colleagues. The cold mathematics of corporate downsizing didn't account for human value, only hiring dates and departmental redundancies. She reached for her phone to call him, then stopped. What would she say? How do you tell someone that all their hard work, all their dreams of stability and advancement, are about to disappear because of decisions made in boardrooms by people who'd never met them? Instead, she called her supervisor, regional manager David Chen, a man she'd worked with for 3 years and generally respected for his straightforward approach to business challenges. "V," he said when his assistant connected them, "I assume you're calling about the restructuring memo." "I am. I have some concerns about the timeline and the selection criteria. It's not negotiable. Corporate wants this done quickly and quietly. The numbers are final. David, some of these employees are our best performers. Evan Morales, for instance, he's been recommended for promotion. His quality scores are exceptional." Morales. She heard papers shuffling. 6 months tenure, night shift packaging. "I'm sorry, V, but he doesn't make the cut, unless there are performance issues you haven't documented." The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. She could hear what he wasn't saying, that personal feelings might be clouding her professional judgment, that her recommendation for someone so recently hired might raise questions about her objectivity. "No performance issues," she said carefully. "Quite the opposite. I'm simply pointing out that tenure doesn't always correlate with value to the organization. I understand your position, but the decision matrix has been approved at the highest levels. We're not making individual exceptions." After the call ended, V sat alone in her office, staring at the memo that would destroy the life Evan had worked so hard to build. 23 families would be affected, but only one of them would feel like a personal betrayal of everything she'd come to value over the past month. She thought about Saturday dinner, about Mia's easy affection and Evan's gentle humor, about the way they'd made her feel like part of something larger than herself. She thought about the drawings taped to her office wall, about Connor's baseball glove on her bookshelf, about the slow resurrection of her capacity to care about other people's happiness. And she thought about the choice that now lay before her: protect her own position by implementing the layoffs as directed, or find a way to fight for the people who mattered to her, even if it meant risking everything she'd built professionally. By lunchtime, she'd made her decision. The plan was risky, potentially career-ending, but it was the only path she could live with. She spent the afternoon building her case, gathering performance data, productivity metrics, and cost-benefit analyses that demonstrated the folly of eliminating top performers in favor of protecting tenure. She documented every innovation Evan had suggested, every problem he'd solved, every way he'd made their operation more efficient. More importantly, she crafted a counter-proposal. If corporate was determined to cut costs, there were other ways to achieve their financial targets: restructuring, overtime policies, consolidating some management positions, implementing efficiency improvements that would reduce operational expenses without sacrificing human capital. It would mean putting her own job on the line. Regional supervisors who challenged directives from headquarters didn't typically enjoy long careers. But as she worked through the afternoon, compiling evidence and building arguments, V realized that some things were more important than job security. That evening, she found Evan in the parking lot after his shift, waiting by his car with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who'd put in a good day's work. He smiled when he saw her approaching, the same warm expression that had become one of the best parts of her day. "Hey," he said, "Mia wanted me to ask if you're coming to her science fair presentation tomorrow. She's been practicing her explanation about plants and reading comprehension." "Evan," she started, then stopped. "How do you tell someone that their world is about to collapse? How do you explain that forces beyond their control have decided their value as a human being?" "What's wrong?" His smile faded as he read her expression. "V, what happened?" She handed him the memo, watching his face as he read through the clinical language that reduced him to a statistic. His hands didn't shake, but she saw the moment the reality hit him, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry a suddenly heavier weight. "When?" he asked quietly. "End of the week. Evan, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to—" "No." His voice was firm, decisive. "Don't risk your career for me. I knew this was a possibility when I took the job. Manufacturing jobs aren't exactly secure these days. This isn't about manufacturing jobs. This is about a system that values tenure over talent, that treats people like expendable resources instead of—" Instead of what? Instead of human beings who matter. Instead of fathers who work 2 jobs to provide for their children. Instead of people who've earned their place through dedication and skill. Evan leaned against his car, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. What will you tell Mia? The question broke something inside her chest. What do you mean? She's expecting you at the science fair. She's been planning to introduce you to her teacher as her friend who knows about business and feelings. What do you tell a 6-year-old when the adults she trusts let her down? I'm not letting her down. I'm not letting either of you down. Aren't you? You're part of the system that just decided my family's stability is less important than corporate profit margins. The accusation stung because it was true. She was part of that system, had built her career within it, had accepted its logic even when it conflicted with human decency. You're right, she said. I am part of that system, but I don't have to implement its worst impulses without a fight. What are you going to do? I'm going to headquarters tomorrow. I'm going to present an alternative that saves jobs and money. I'm going to make them understand that good employees are assets, not liabilities. Evan studied her face in the parking lot's fluorescent lighting. And if they say no, if they tell you to implement the layoffs as written or find another job, then I guess we'll both be looking for work. V, you can't sacrifice your career for. For what? For you, for Mia, for the principle that people should matter more than spreadsheets. She stepped closer, her voice intense with conviction. Maybe that's exactly what I should sacrifice it for. They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding that everything between them had just changed. The easy progression from professional respect to personal affection had been complicated by forces larger than either of them could control. I should get home, Evan said finally. Mia will be waiting. Will you tell her about the layoffs? I don't know. Maybe. She's going to ask why you're not at the science fair if you don't come. I'll be there. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll be there. As she watched him drive away, V felt the weight of the choice she'd made. In a few hours, she would walk into a corporate conference room and challenge decisions made by people who outranked her, out-earned her, and could end her career with a phone call. But for the first time in 4 years, she was fighting for something that mattered more than her own security. She was fighting for the kind of connection that Mia had shown her was possible, for the belief that love and loyalty were worth more than professional advancement. The memo lay on her passenger seat as she drove home, 23 names representing 23 families whose lives would be disrupted by corporate efficiency. But it was the 3rd name on the list that had changed everything, the name that had transformed this from a business decision into a moral imperative. Tomorrow would determine whether she had the courage to choose love over safety, whether she could be the kind of person Mia believed she was, whether she could fight for what mattered even when the odds were stacked against her. The little girl who'd walked into her office 6 weeks ago had asked if she missed her son. Tomorrow, V would find out if she'd learned enough about love and loss to fight for the living. V spent the night before her headquarters, meeting in Connor's room, surrounded by the carefully prepared presentation that represented her last hope of saving Evan's job. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkness, displaying charts and graphs that reduced human lives to data points, trying to make a business case for compassion. The promotion application Evan had submitted weeks earlier lay on the desk beside her 3 pages of carefully documented achievements, goals, and aspirations that now felt like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. She'd read it so many times she could recite his career objectives from memory, could trace the careful progression from survival to ambition that characterized every word. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee, the same ritual that had sustained her through countless nights of corporate crisis management. But this felt different. This wasn't about production schedules or efficiency metrics. This was about the choice between the person she'd been for 4 years, professionally successful but emotionally dead-end, the person Mia and Evan had reminded her she could still become. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evan, "Can't sleep either. Good luck today. Whatever happens, thank you for caring enough to try. She stared at the message for a long time before responding. See you at the science fair. Mia's going to change the world with those lima beans. She already changed mine. Both of you did. The vulnerability in those words, sent in the small hours when defenses were down, crystallized everything she was fighting for. This wasn't just about saving one job or challenging one corporate decision. This was about the radical act of choosing to care about someone else's happiness more than your own security. The morning brought rain and the kind of grey sky that matched her mood as she drove to regional headquarters. The building was a monument to corporate efficiency, glass and steel, everything designed to intimidate and impress. She'd been here dozens of times for routine meetings, but today felt like walking into battle, armed with nothing but spreadsheets and moral conviction. David Chen's office was on the 15th floor, with windows overlooking the city where 23 families were going about their morning routines, unaware that their economic futures were being decided in a conference room decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. V. David greeted her, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. I have to say, I'm surprised you requested this meeting. The restructuring parameters aren't typically subject to field supervisor input. I understand that, but I believe there are alternatives that would achieve the same cost savings without sacrificing our most valuable employees. She opened her laptop and began the presentation she'd rehearsed a dozen times, walking through productivity data, quality metrics, and efficiency improvements that painted a picture of the night shift as a lean, well-functioning operation that couldn't afford to lose key personnel. These numbers are impressive, David acknowledged when she finished. But the directive isn't about performance, it's about payroll reduction, and that means positions, not just productivity. What if we could achieve the same payroll reduction through restructuring rather than layoffs? What kind of restructuring? This was the moment of truth, the choice that would define not just her career but her integrity. Consolidate some management positions, reduce administrative overhead, implement the efficiency improvements that would eliminate the need for overtime pay. Those efficiency improvements would require capital investment in new equipment. The ROI projections show payback within 18 months. Versus the cost of rehiring and retraining when the economy improves, it's actually more cost-effective long-term. David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. This is very thorough, V. But I have to ask, is this about operational efficiency, or is it about one particular employee? The question she'd been dreading, the challenge to her professional objectivity that could undermine everything she'd built. She thought about Evan's face when he'd read the layoff memo, about Mia's excitement for the science fair, about the choice between protecting herself and protecting what mattered. It's about both, she said finally. Yes, I care about Evan Morales as a person, but my personal feelings don't change the fact that eliminating him would be a mistake from a purely business perspective. Personal feelings can compromise professional judgment. They can also motivate you to fight harder for what's right. David was quiet for a long moment, reviewing her presentation materials with the careful attention of someone weighing risks and benefits. The regional director will want to see these numbers, and she'll want to understand why a night shift supervisor is challenging a directive that came from corporate. Because someone has to. Because numbers on a spreadsheet don't capture the human cost of these decisions. Because we have an obligation to our employees that goes beyond the minimum required by law. That's not typically how business works, V. Maybe it should be. The meeting ended without resolution, with David promising to review her proposal and present it to his superiors. As she drove back to TechFlow, V felt the weight of uncertainty, the knowledge that she'd done everything she could but might not have done enough. The science fair was scheduled for 2 p.m., and despite everything else happening, she wasn't going to disappoint Mia. She stopped at home to change clothes, trading her corporate armor for something more appropriate for an elementary school event, then drove to Mia's school with a sense of surreal displacement. The gymnasium was decorated with colorful banners and filled with the excited energy of children sharing their discoveries with adults who mattered to them. Parents and grandparents moved between display tables, offering encouragement and asking questions that made 6-year-olds feel like real scientists. She found Mia's project Easela, carefully constructed display about plant growth and reading comprehension, complete with photographs documenting 3 weeks of reading Charlotte's Web to lima bean plants. The hypothesis was simple. Plants that are read to will grow taller than plants that aren't. The results were compelling. The reading group plants were noticeably larger and healthier than the control group. "Ms. V," Mia's voice cut through the crowd as she spotted her approaching. "You came. Daddy, she really came." Evan was standing behind the display table, wearing the kind of patient smile that parents perfected at school events. But when he looked at V, she could see the question in his eyes, the hope and fear that her presence meant something significant about his future. "I wouldn't miss it," V said, focusing on Mia's eager face. "Tell me about your experiment." For the next 20 minutes, she listened to Mia's detailed explanation of methodology, observations, and conclusions. The little girl's enthusiasm was infectious, her pride in her work evident in every carefully rehearsed word. "The plants that got stories grew better because they had someone paying attention to them," Mia concluded. "Just like people, everyone grows better when someone cares about them." "That's a very wise conclusion," we said, acutely aware of how the child's simple observation applied to her own recent transformation. "Did your meeting go okay?" Evan asked quietly while Mia was distracted by a friend, asking about her project. "I don't know yet. I presented the alternative proposal. Now we wait. And if they say no, then we deal with whatever comes next." Before he could respond, Mia was back, tugging on V's sleeve with the urgency of someone with important news to share. "Miss V, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice dropping to the stage whisper that children used for secrets. "I heard Daddy on the phone this morning, and I know about the job thing." V's stomach dropped. "You do? He might have to find a new job, which means we might not see you as much. But I want you to know that even if that happens, you're still part of our family now. Families don't stop being families just because things get complicated." The words hit V with the force of absolute truth delivered by someone too young to understand how profound she was being. Here was a 6-year-old offering comfort to an adult, providing reassurance about connection and commitment that transcended employment status and corporate decisions. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know." "Good, because Daddy needs people who care about him, and you need people to care about too. That's how families work." As they prepared to leave the science fair, V's phone rang. David Chen's name appeared on the screen, and she felt her heart rate spike. "I need to take this," she told Evan and Mia. "V," David's voice was neutral, professional. "The regional director has reviewed your proposal. She wants to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss implementation." "Implementation." She was impressed by your analysis. "Corporate is willing to consider the alternative approach, with some modifications. Can you be here at 9 a.m.? After she hung up, V stood in the elementary school parking lot, rain beginning to fall again, processing the possibility that her desperate gambit might actually work. That caring about someone enough to risk everything might not end in disaster. Evan and Mia were waiting by his car, both of them watching her face for clues about their future. "Well?" Evan asked. "They want to discuss implementation," she said, hardly believing the words herself. After she hung up, V stood in the elementary school parking lot, rain beginning to fall again, processing the possibility that her desperate gambit might actually work. That caring about someone enough to risk everything might not end in disaster. Evan and Mia were waiting by his car, both of them watching her face for clues about their future. "Well?" Evan asked. "They want to discuss implementation," she said, hardly believing the words herself. Mia threw her arms around V's waist with the uninhibited joy of someone who'd never doubted that love could conquer corporate bureaucracy. "I knew it. I knew you'd figure out how to fix it." But Evan's expression was more cautious. "Implementation of what?" The alternative proposal: instead of layoffs, they're considering restructuring operations, consolidating some management positions, investing in efficiency improvements. And my job? Still yours, if the regional director approves the final plan tomorrow. The relief in his eyes was quickly replaced by something more complex: gratitude mixed with concern, hope tempered by the understanding of what her advocacy might have cost her. V, what did you risk for this? Everything that mattered less than keeping your family together. That evening, Evan insisted on cooking dinner for Hera celebration meal, he called it, though they all understood it was premature to celebrate. Mia set the table with her best attempts at formal place settings, using cloth napkins and the fancy plates that came out for special occasions. This feels like a holiday, Mia announced, surveying her handiwork. Like Thanksgiving, but for different reasons. What are you thankful for? V asked, settling into the chair that had somehow become hers at their small dining table. For you being brave enough to fight for Daddy. For Daddy being good enough to fight for. For lima beans that teach us about caring. She paused, thoughtfully. And for families that choose each other, instead of just getting stuck with each other. Over dinner, they talked about everything except the uncertainty that loomed over all their futures. Mia shared the compliments she'd received on her science project. Evan described a new efficiency process he'd been developing. And V found herself talking about Connor in a way she hadn't in years, not with pain, but with the gentle sadness of good memories. He would have loved your science fair, she told Mia. He was always curious about how things worked, always asking questions that made me think harder about simple things. Like what? Like why the sky was blue, or how plants knew which way to grow toward the sun, or whether dogs dreamed about the same things people did. Do you think they do? Dream about the same things? I think they probably dream about the things that make them happiest. Walks and treats and the people they love. What do you dream about? The question was innocent, but it stopped V cold. For years, her dreams had been either nightmares about loss or empty spaces where dreams used to be. But lately, they'd been different: warm, hopeful, filled with the voices of people who mattered. Lately, I dream about dinner conversations like this one, about being part of something bigger than just myself. After Mia went to bed, Evan and V sat on his small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle through the clearing rain. The silence between them was comfortable, but charged with everything they weren't saying. Tomorrow could change everything, Evan said finally. It already has. Whatever happens in that meeting, I'm not the same person I was 6 weeks ago. What are you now? She considered the question seriously. Someone who's remembered that connection is worth fighting for. Someone who's learned that caring about people doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And if the regional director says no, if they insist on the layoffs, then I'll resign before I implement them. Evan turned to look at her directly. You can't sacrifice your career for me. I'm not sacrificing it for you. I'm sacrificing it for the person I want to be, the person your daughter reminded me I could still become. Mia has that effect on people. She gets it from her father, the capacity to care, to see the best in people, to believe that kindness matters more than rules. They sat in silence for a while, both of them aware that tomorrow would either validate the risk they'd taken or confirm that the corporate world had no place for the kind of love that prioritized people over profit. V. Evan's voice was quiet, uncertain. Yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past weeks getting to know you, watching Mia fall in love with you, remembering what it feels like to care about someone, it's been worth it. Even if everything falls apart, it's been worth it. For me too, more than I thought possible. As she drove home that night, V carried with her the weight of tomorrow's uncertainty and the warmth of tonight's certainty that she'd found something worth fighting for. Something that made the risk feel like the most rational choice she'd ever made. Her apartment felt different when she walked in, still too large, still too quiet, but no longer empty. The photographs she'd avoided looking at for 4 years, pictures of her and Connor, images of the life they'd shared, seemed to welcome her home rather than reproach her for moving forward. She pulled out a photo from Connor's 7th birthday, both of them covered in frosting and grinning at the camera. For the first time since his death, looking at his face didn't bring only pain. There was grief, yes, but also gratitude for the love they'd shared, and the understanding that loving him didn't prevent her from loving others. "I think you'd like them," she said to the photograph. "Mia reminds me of you, curious and kind, and absolutely certain that the world should make sense. And Evan, he's the kind of father you deserve to grow up with." Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight brought something equally valuable, the peace of knowing she'd chosen courage over safety, love over isolation, the messy uncertainty of caring over the sterile predictability of emotional distance. Whatever happened in that conference room, she would face it as the person she'd become, rather than the person she'd been hiding behind for 4 years. And that, in itself, felt like a victory worth celebrating. The resignation letter sat in V's briefcase as she walked into regional headquarters the next morning. 2 pages of carefully crafted professional language that boiled down to a simple statement. She would not implement layoffs that prioritized tenure over talent, politics over people, corporate convenience over human dignity. She'd written it at 4 a.m. after lying awake for hours, wrestling with the possibility that her alternative proposal would be rejected, that she'd be ordered to proceed with the original plan or find another job. The letter was her insurance policy, her guarantee that whatever happened in the next hour, she could look at herself in the mirror afterward. Regional Director Sarah Martinez was waiting in the conference room when V arrived, along with David Chen and 2 executives she didn't recognize. The formal setting-polished table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city, felt designed to intimidate, to remind everyone present of the corporate hierarchy and their place within it. "Miss Harper," Sarah began without preamble, "I've reviewed your alternative proposal. It's comprehensive, well-researched, and frankly, more creative than most solutions we see from field supervisors." V felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by experience. Corporate praise often preceded corporate rejection, softening the blow of disappointing news. "However," Sarah continued, "implementation would require significant changes to our operational structure. Changes that would affect not just your facility, but how we approach workforce management across all our locations." "I understand that, ma'am, but the long-term benefits—" "Let me finish." Sarah's tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. "The question isn't whether your proposal has merit. The question is whether we're prepared to admit that our standard approach to cost reduction might be flawed." One of the unnamed executives leaned forward. "Ms. Harper, your proposal essentially argues that investing in employee retention is more cost-effective than cyclical hiring and firing. That flies in the face of decades of accepted practice in our industry." "Yes, sir, it does. Because decades of accepted practice have led to a workforce that's demoralized, undertrained, and constantly looking for better opportunities. We're paying premium wages for constant turnover instead of building institutional knowledge and employee loyalty. And you believe this because of your experience with one particular employee." The question was a trap, designed to make her admit that personal feelings had compromised her professional judgment. But V had spent the night preparing for exactly this challenge. "I believe this because Evan Morales represents everything we should want in an employer: reliability, skill development, innovation, commitment to quality. The fact that our current system would eliminate him while protecting less productive workers with more tenure demonstrates the fundamental flaw in our approach. You're asking us to restructure operations to save 1 job. I'm asking you to restructure operations to save 23 jobs while actually improving our bottom line. The fact that one of those jobs belongs to someone I care about doesn't invalidate the business case." Sarah Martinez had been taking notes throughout the exchange, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Harper, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. If we approve your proposal, are you prepared to implement it with the same efficiency you've brought to every other assignment?" "Yes, ma'am." "And if we reject it, if we order you to proceed with the original layoff plan, This was the moment of truth, the choice between career preservation and moral integrity. V thought about Mia's drawing taped to her office wall, about Connor's baseball glove sitting on her bookshelf, about the dinner conversations that had reminded her what it meant to be part of a family. Then I'll submit my resignation rather than implement a plan I believe is fundamentally wrong. The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours. Sarah and the executives exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that happened between people who'd worked together long enough to read subtle signals. That's quite a risk to take for someone who's been your subordinate for 6 months, one of the executives observed. It's not a risk I'm taking for him. It's a risk I'm taking for the kind of leader I want to be, the kind of company I want to work for, and the kind of decisions I want to be able to defend to my conscience. David Chen, who'd been quiet throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up. Sarah, I've worked with V for 3 years. She's never shown poor judgment when it comes to personnel decisions. If she says this employee is worth fighting for, I'm inclined to trust her assessment, even if her personal feelings are involved. Especially because her personal feelings are involved. Leaders who care about their people make better decisions than leaders who see employees as interchangeable resources. Sarah Martinez closed her folder and leaned back in her chair. Harper, your proposal would require significant capital investment, restructuring of management responsibilities, and a fundamental shift in how we approach workforce planning. Yes, ma'am, it would. It would also set a precedent for other supervisors to challenge corporate directives when they conflict with local conditions. I hope it would. That's either very brave or very naive. Maybe both. But I'd rather be brave and naive than efficient and heartless. Sarah stood up, signaling the end of the formal meeting. Give us an hour to discuss this. David, please escort Miss Harper to the waiting area. As they left the conference room, David walked beside her in silence until they reached the elevator. You know, he said quietly, in 15 years of corporate management, I've never seen anyone put their career on the line for a principle quite so directly. How do you think it's going to go? Honestly, I don't know. Sarah Martinez is tough but fair. She values results over politics, which works in your favor. But the executives from corporate there focused on quarterly numbers and risk management. And my resignation threat. Either brilliant or career suicide. Possibly both. V spent the next hour in a windowless waiting room, alternately reviewing her presentation notes and staring at her phone, where messages from Evan had been accumulating throughout the morning. Thinking about you. Whatever happens, we're proud of you. Mia made you a good luck drawing. She says it has extra magic because she used glitter. I love you. I know this isn't the time or place to say it, but if everything falls apart today, I want you to know. The last message stopped her breath. 3 words that changed everything and nothing, that made the stakes impossibly higher and the risk infinitely more worthwhile. She was still staring at the screen when David Chen appeared in the doorway. They're ready for you. When V returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. Sarah Martinez was standing at the window, looking out at the city below, while the corporate executives were huddled over laptops, their expressions serious but not hostile. David Chen caught her eye and nodded slightly, not quite encouragement, but not defeat either. Ms. Harper, Sarah said without turning around, we've had an interesting conversation about your proposal, more interesting than I expected when I walked in here this morning. V remained standing, uncertain whether she was about to be congratulated or terminated. Yes, ma'am. The executives from corporate have some questions about implementation timelines and cost projections. But before we get into those details, I want to understand something about your motivation. Sarah finally turned to face her, and V was surprised to see something that looked almost like respect in her expression. You've built your career on being the supervisor who gets results without drama, who implements directives efficiently and without complaint. This situation, fighting for an employee, challenging corporate policy, threatening resignation, it's completely out of character for the Vanessa Harper I've known for 3 years. Yes, ma'am, it is. What changed? The question was simple, but the answer was everything that mattered. V thought about Mia's innocent wisdom, about Evan's quiet strength, about the way love had crept back into her life when she'd thought it was gone forever. "I remembered what I was working for," she said finally. "For 3 years I've been focused on metrics and efficiency and climbing the corporate ladder. But I forgot that the point of all that work is supposed to be building something better for real people. When that got flipped, when protecting the system became more important than protecting the people the system is supposed to serve, I realized I'd lost sight of what actually matters." One of the corporate executives looked up from his laptop. "That's a very idealistic perspective, Miss Harper. But business requires pragmatic decisions based on financial realities, not emotional attachments. With respect, sir, I think that's a false choice. The most successful companies are the ones that figure out how to align financial success with employee welfare. What I'm proposing isn't idealistic, it's practical. It's a better way to achieve the cost savings you want while building a stronger, more committed workforce. And if you're wrong, if the efficiency improvements don't materialize, if the capital investment doesn't pay off." V had spent hours running scenarios, calculating risks, preparing for exactly this question. "Then I'll take full responsibility for the failure. But the alternative, implementing layoffs that sacrifice our best people for short-term savings, is guaranteed to hurt us long-term." Sarah Martinez returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. "Ms. Harper, implementing your proposal would require approval from the board level. It would mean defending a completely different approach to workforce management, to people who've been doing things the same way for decades. I understand that. Are you prepared to present this proposal to the board yourself, to stake your reputation on its success?" The question was both an opportunity and a test. Board-level presentations could make careers or destroy them, and volunteering for that level of exposure was either confident or foolish. "Yes, ma'am. I believe in this approach strongly enough to defend it at any level." Sarah looked at her 2 corporate colleagues, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we're going to approve a modified version of your proposal. The layoffs are suspended pending implementation of your efficiency improvements. You'll have 6 months to demonstrate measurable results, cost savings, productivity improvements, and employee retention metrics that justify the investment." V felt her knees go weak with relief, but Sarah wasn't finished. "However, this comes with conditions. First, you'll be personally responsible for the success or failure of this initiative. If the numbers don't materialize, the layoffs will be implemented as originally planned. Second, you'll present quarterly updates to the regional board, defending your approach and demonstrating progress. Third, this program will be monitored as a potential model for other facilities, which means your performance will be under constant scrutiny." "I understand." "And fourth," Sarah's expression grew more serious, "your relationship with Mr. Morales will be subject to review by HR. Personal relationships between supervisors and subordinates create potential conflicts of interest that need to be managed carefully." The condition hit like a physical blow. After everything they'd risked, everything they'd fought for, the possibility that corporate policy might still tear them apart felt like the cruelest irony. What kind of review? Standard procedure, documentation of the relationship timeline, assessment of any preferential treatment, recommendations for managing potential conflicts going forward. It's not punitive, it's protective for both of you. One of the corporate executives closed his laptop and looked at V directly. "Ms. Harper, you've put us in an unusual position. We don't typically approve proposals that challenge fundamental operational principles based on the advocacy of field supervisors. But your presentation was compelling, and frankly, your willingness to stake your career on this approach suggests a level of confidence that's hard to ignore. Thank you, sir. Don't thank us yet. You've got 6 months to prove that caring about employees can coexist with fiscal responsibility. If you succeed, you'll have changed how this company approaches workforce management. If you fail, I won't fail." David Chen had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now he spoke up. "Sarah, what about the promotion V recommended for Morales, the quality control lead position?" "Approved, effective immediately. Ms. Harper's personal investment in his success doesn't change the fact that his qualifications are exceptional. If anything, having a supervisor willing to fight for his advancement suggests he's exactly the kind of employee we should be promoting." As the meeting concluded and she prepared to leave, Sarah Martinez walked with V toward the elevator. "Off the record," Sarah said quietly. "I've been watching corporate layoff policies destroy good people and strong teams for 10 years. I've never had someone present a viable alternative with such conviction. I'm rooting for you to succeed. Thank you. I won't let you down." "You better not, because if this works, if you can demonstrate that investing in people is actually more profitable than discarding them, you'll have given all of us a better way to do business." The elevator ride down felt surreal. In the space of 2 hours, she'd gone from preparing to resign to being handed the opportunity to fundamentally change how the company treated its employees. The victory was everything she'd hoped for, but the conditions, especially the HR review of her relationship with Evan, reminded her that personal happiness was still secondary to corporate concerns. Her phone had been buzzing throughout the meeting, messages she hadn't been able to check. Now, as she walked to her car, she scrolled through them quickly. "Evan, however this goes, I'm proud of you for fighting. Evan, Mia wants to know if she should save you some of her celebration cookies. Evan, I meant what I said earlier about loving you, whatever happens." And then, time stamped just minutes ago, "The plant manager just called. They want to see me about the promotion. V, did you?" She called him immediately, not caring about corporate parking lots or professional boundaries. "Evan, it's me. Are you sitting down? Please tell me you didn't sacrifice your career for my job." "I didn't sacrifice anything. They approved the proposal, all of it. No layoffs, efficiency improvements instead, and your promotion is effective immediately." The silence on the other end lasted so long she thought they'd been disconnected. "Evan, are you there?" "I'm here. I'm just..." His voice cracked slightly. "I can't believe it worked. I can't believe you actually changed their minds." "We changed their minds. Your work performance, Mia's wisdom about caring for people, the evidence that doing the right thing can also be the profitable thing. There's more, isn't there? There always is with corporate decisions." She took a breath, preparing to explain about HR reviews and policy complications, about the ongoing scrutiny their relationship would face. But before she could speak, she heard Mia's voice in the background. "Is that Miss V? Tell her I finished her good luck drawing and it worked. Tell her she's the best fighter for families ever." And suddenly, none of the corporate complications mattered. They would navigate HR reviews and policy restrictions and whatever bureaucratic obstacles came next. They'd proven that love was worth fighting for, that caring about people could coexist with professional success. "Tell Mia," V said, "that her magic drawings are more powerful than any corporate policy. And tell her I'm on my way to celebrate." 6 months later, V stood in the same TechFlow cafeteria where she'd once eaten solitary lunches, surrounded by employees who'd transformed from suspicious subordinates into something resembling a chosen family. The plant's annual family picnic was in full swing, children running between picnic tables, while their parents shared stories and laughter that would have been unimaginable during the dark days of potential layoffs. The new family photo tucked into a planner showed the 3 of them at last month's company barbecue. Evan in his quality control supervisor shirt, Mia wearing a miniature hard hat that someone had custom made for her, and V herself looking more relaxed and genuinely happy than she had in years. The picture captured a moment of pure joy, the kind of spontaneous laughter that happened when people felt truly at home with each other. "Miss V," Mia's voice carried across the crowd as she raced over, her face painted with butterflies and her arms full of arts and crafts, projects from the children's activity table. "Look what I made for your office." The latest creation was a collage made from magazine cutouts and glitter, depicting what Mia called the best workplace ever, stick figure families working together, smiling faces, and rainbow hearts scattered throughout. In the center, she'd written, "Where people take care of each other," in her increasingly confident handwriting. "It's perfect," V said, accepting the gift with the solemnity such offerings deserved. "I'll put it right next to your lima bean research notes." The efficiency improvements had exceeded everyone's expectations. Productivity was up 23%, employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero, and the cost savings from reduced overtime and training expenses had more than justified the initial capital investment. The quarterly board presentations that had once felt like trials had become victory laps, demonstrations of what became possible when companies chose to invest in people rather than discard them. More importantly, the TechFlow plant had become a model for other facilities in the company network. Sarah Martinez had called just last week to discuss expanding the program, and there was talk of V being promoted to regional operations manager position that would let her implement people-centered policies across multiple locations. "Hard to believe it's only been 6 months, Evan said, appearing beside them with 2 plates of barbecue and the easy smile that had become his default expression since the promotion. The quality control lead position had suited him perfectly, combining his attention to detail with his natural ability to mentor other employees. "Feels longer," V replied, "in the best possible way." "Because time moves differently when you're happy," Mia announced with the authority of someone who'd made an important scientific discovery. "I read about it in my science magazine. When you're doing things you love with people you love, your brain makes better memories, so it feels like more time happened." The HR review had concluded months ago with a formal recommendation that Evan transfer to shift supervision to eliminate any appearance of favoritism. The solution had worked perfectly. He was no longer her direct subordinate, but they worked closely enough to see each other every day. The official documentation of their relationship timeline had actually strengthened their position, demonstrating that their personal connection had developed after, not before, his professional achievements. "Daddy," Mia said, tugging on Evan's sleeve with the persistence of someone with urgent news, "Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if Miss V is coming to my school play next week." "What school play?" V asked. "The one about community helpers. I'm playing a manager who makes good decisions and takes care of her workers. Mrs. Rodriguez says it's inspired by real life." Evan and V exchanged amused glances. Mia's teacher had apparently decided that their story was worth sharing with first graders, translated into the kind of simple moral lessons that 6-year-olds could understand and apply. "Of course I'll be there," V said. "I wouldn't miss seeing you play a manager who makes good decisions." "Good, because I've been practicing your serious meeting face." Mia demonstrated an expression of exaggerated concentration that bore no resemblance to any face V had ever made, but was apparently her 6-year-old interpretation of corporate authority. As the afternoon continued, V found herself moving through conversations with employees who'd become friends, families who'd included her in their circle, children who'd accepted her presence as naturally as if she'd always been there. The transformation still amazed her not just in her own life, but in the entire culture of the workplace. "You know," Evan said during a quiet moment as they watched Mia teach a group of younger children how to make friendship bracelets, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. For fighting when I was ready to give up. For showing Mia that adults could be trusted to keep their promises." "You don't need to thank me for that. We helped each other." "Did we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saved my career, secured my family's future, and changed an entire company's approach to employee relations. What did I do for you?" V looked at him, at this man who'd somehow become the center of her world without either of them quite planning it, and thought about how to explain the magnitude of what he'd given her. "You reminded me that I was still alive," she said finally. "For 4 years, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You and Mia showed me that it was possible to care about people again without losing myself in the process. And Connor, do you think he would approve of what we've built?" The question would have been unbearable 6 months ago. Now, it felt like an invitation to include her son in the happiness she'd found, to honor his memory by embracing the love that had become possible. I think he'd be proud that his mom learned how to be part of a family again, and I think he'd absolutely adore Mia. She talks about him sometimes, you know, like he's a friend she hasn't met yet, but knows she will someday. That sounds like her. She has very strong opinions about how families work, even the complicated ones. As the picnic wound down and families began packing up their belongings, Mia appeared with a final project from the arts and crafts tableau hand-traced turkey, decorated with feathers, each one labeled with something she was grateful for. "Look," she said, pointing to each feather in turn. "Daddy, Miss V, our house, my school, lima beans that grow when you read to them, and friends who become family." "What about this one?" V asked, pointing to a feather decorated with silver glitter but no words. "That's for all the good things that haven't happened yet but are going to, because we take care of each other." The simple wisdom of it took V's breath away. Here was a 6-year-old who understood something that most adults spent lifetimes trying to learn, that love created its own momentum, that caring for people generated more opportunities for caring, that families could be built through choice and commitment as much as through blood and circumstance. As they walked to their cars, Mia skipping between them and chattering about the upcoming school play, V felt the deep satisfaction of a life that finally made sense. The career success was gratifying, but it was secondary to the more fundamental achievement of learning how to love without fear, how to build connections that enhanced rather than threatened her sense of security. "Miss V," Mia said, suddenly serious, "can I ask you something important?" "Of course." "Do you think you'll stay with us forever, like a real family?" The question hung in the evening air, loaded with the hopes and fears that came with loving people enough to want guarantees about the future. Evan tensed slightly, and V understood that this was a conversation they'd all been preparing for, without quite knowing how to begin it. "I think," V said carefully, "that the best families are the ones where people choose to stay, not because they have to, but because they can't imagine being anywhere else." "And you can't imagine being anywhere else?" "No, sweetheart, I can't." Mia nodded with satisfaction, as if she'd been conducting an important interview and received the exact answer she'd been hoping for. "Good, because Daddy makes extra dinner every night in case you want to come over, and I've been saving the best seat on the couch for family movie nights." As they reached their cars, Evan caught V's hand, intertwining their fingers with the easy familiarity of people who'd stopped questioning whether they belonged together. "So," he said, "family movie night tomorrow. Mia's been campaigning for something involving talking animals and important life lessons. I'll bring popcorn, the good kind, with real butter." "It's a deal. Although fair warning, she's going to try to stay up past her bedtime by claiming the movie is educational. I'm counting on it. Some of the best conversations happen when kids are supposed to be asleep." Driving home to her apartment that no longer felt too large or too quiet, V carried with her the warmth of belonging, the security of love that had been tested and proven durable, and the anticipation of all the ordinary moments that would make up their extraordinary life together. The photo from the company picnic would join the others on her desk, evidence of the family she'd found when she'd stopped looking for one. Proof that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as complications that forced you to choose between safety and love. She'd chosen love, and love had chosen her back, in the form of a dedicated father and his wise daughter who'd seen past her defenses to the person she'd forgotten she could be. Together, they'd built something that corporate policies couldn't define and efficiency metrics couldn't measure, a family bound, not by obligation, but by the radical decision to care for each other's happiness as much as their own.